Yes, yes, yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you. On behalf of the Fiscal Council of Hungary and on behalf of the board of the Hungarian Economics Association, I warmly welcome you at our joint event. As you may remember, the Fiscal Council and the Economic Association has been organizing this joint event for several years, more than I can remember back. And until last year, the agenda of this event was to present the research papers of the top Hungarian research institutions and analysts that were prepared for the Fiscal Council during the respective year. Jointly with the new president of the Hungarian Fiscal Council, last year we decided to change the format a little bit. I mean, we decided to invite his fellow chairs from the Czech Republic and from Romania to have a morning session, a morning panel discussion on fiscal issues, and that was followed by the presentation of the research papers. This format was very well received. It generated huge interest thanks to the very open, very straightforward discussion among the Fiscal Council chairmen. Therefore, this year we decided not just to continue this practice, but also to extend the invitation to the chairman of the Slovak Fiscal Council. So now we have a four-member panel, which will be moderated by myself. When it comes to the program of this morning, so till 11:30 we will have this panel discussion. So first, the four chairmen will deliver a short presentation on the most important issues which they consider most important. And then at 11:30, Professor Peter Bod will have his words to the audience. Then we will have a lunch break, and we start the afternoon section at 12:30 sharp, and it will finish around 3 p.m. or 30. So let me introduce then our panelists today. So let me start with Mr. Mojmír Hampl, whom you may remember from last year. He is the president of the Czech Fiscal Council. Mojmír has gained his academic level at several universities, some in Prague, some abroad. He has most of his time he spent with the Central Bank of the Czech Republic, and he started his career as an analyst, and he ended up as a deputy governor. And back in 22, he became the president of the Czech Fiscal Council. He is very well known from his outspoken opinion regarding the euro adoption and the integration as a whole. So it would be interesting to listen to him. Then we have Dăianu, who is the president of the Fiscal Council of Romania. Daniel is an economist, an academic, lecturer, politician, so he has a very rich career. He used to be the Minister of Finance in Romania. He used to be the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank. He used to be the European Parliament member. He has several publications and gives lectures at different universities around the world. Well, Mojmír does the same. And then we have Ján TÓTH from Slovakia. He is the chairman of the Slovak Fiscal Council. He used to work for the biggest Slovak banks for a long time as analyst, macro-analyst, and then he worked for the Ministry of Finance. He was responsible for the macro projections for the government, and then he was the deputy governor of the central bank, and finally became, in 2022, he became the president of the chairman of the Fiscal Council. And last but not least, we have Gábor Horváth, our chairman of the chairman of our Fiscal Council. Gábor is an economist as well. And he spent most of his career, the largest part of his career, with the #1 Hungarian bank, OTP, in different positions, different management positions. He is an expert in risk management, as operational risk, credit risk, market risk, whatever risks. And he also very good in macroeconomists, and he was appointed chairman of the Hungarian Fiscal Council back in 24. I mean, this past year. So I wouldn't like to waste your time anymore. Instead, I will ask Gábor to start his presentation. Thank you for your attention.
So, warm welcome to everyone. I'm happy to be here again, and I'm very grateful to Gyula Pleschinger, whose idea was to invite my colleagues from Romania and the Czech Republic last year. And I'm very happy that this year they accepted our invitation again, and that Ján TÓTH, our colleague from Slovakia, joined us for hopefully a very fruitful conversation again. I try to keep, and I also express my gratitude toward the Hungarian Economic Association, Mr. President Gyula Pleschinger, and also Gábor Miklós Nagy, the secretary of the association. I try to keep the schedule so that you can enjoy the discussion. That's why I will be very brief, and I will rush into some limited points. I start with some explanation. You've heard at the introduction that my colleagues are economists and I'm a risk manager. If you take a look at the map, you might think why this is the case. The title was "The Situation is Relatively," and I left it open. Sometimes we hear that the debt to GDP in Hungary is relatively good compared to the EU average. However, if we compare to our neighbors in the region, we see that we have a record high debt to GDP ratio, and we're back in the good old times following 3 years after the pandemic, and the normal working of the EU just came back, and we've got the excessive deficit procedures, and Hungary is included in this. The coming back of the normal way of working meant not just that the excessive deficit procedures are back, but that the framework for the economic governance of the European Union was renewed, and the new target variable was introduced, the growth of the net expenditure. What you can see here is what is the cumulated net expenditure envisaged or allowed for the different EU members cumulative to 2028. And you can see that the relative high numbers you see in our region, this has a relation to the macro forecasts. The slightly high inflation, the slightly high expected growth in the region. However, as you will see, even complying with these higher net expenditure figures, because of the mistakes we made in the forecast of the macro path, can mean that formally we comply. However, this does not help necessary to go back to a sustainable trajectory of the debt to GDP ratio in all of the countries. Here you can see some figures concerning Hungary from the report of the European Commission published early summer as an assessment whether we are going to comply with our agreement with the European Union concerning this net expenditure path. Well, it shows the forecast of the Commission made in springtime, and they said that although we failed to comply with the yearly growth rate for 2025 on a cumulative basis, calculating together with 24, we can be okay, according to our agreement. However, here we also need the help which is delivered by the national escape clause, which means that the defense expenditure can be higher than it was in the year 2021 by a maximum of 1.5% of the GDP, and this 1.5% of GDP expenditure is not calculated as a break of the regulation. The problem with this is that defense spending is prioritized higher on the agenda than in previous years. However, this means that the debt trajectory will be different, and sooner or later the consolidation have to be done with increased effort in order to get back to a long-term sustainable path. Because as you can see, even with a positive structural primary balance, if we take in account the cyclical adjustment, we couldn't reach a decrease in the debt to GDP ratio last year, and even this year, well, it's risky whether we can reach this. Most probably, the exchange rate will help us, because last year, end of year exchange rate was 410 against the euro, and this year's, if nothing happens, might be around 390. But this will be only the exchange rate which can help the slight decrease of the debt to GDP ratio, despite complying with the former rules. And as I mentioned, it's the defense pending increase, which, according to the national escape clause, can help to adjust the actual increase in the expenditure. However, this does not help the debt trajectory, as I said. Well, what you can see here is the past, and I will make clearly that it's not the past for which we have to worry, but definitely the future, because up until last year, there was a relatively significant consolidation made to the primary balance of the Hungarian budget, but following 2024, according to the forecast, this year, this type of consolidation will not go further. We will be close to the primary balance. However, as I said, even last year, we failed to reduce the debt to GDP ratio. This year, it's risky again. And the even more problematic part will come with the new measures gradually introduced this year and mainly next year. This is just a long-term story, and just two things concerning this slide. Wherever Hungary was able to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, we needed two things: primary surplus in the budget plus significant growth. Neither of these circumstances is given nowadays. We have a very subdued growth. Basically, this is the third year where the economy is more or less stagnating. And we reached the balance, but we're not having a significant surplus in the budget. And what is ahead of us are many, many measures which have a negative effect on the balance of next year's budget. Here you can see an excerpt from the three-year outlook of the Hungarian Fiscal Council, which was published in February, when all the macro forecasts were much more positive on this year's growth rate. Even the so-called pessimistic forecasts were around 2% or slightly below 2%. Now it turned out that even those forecasts were very optimistic concerning this year's growth, because according to any analyst now, for sure it will be below 1%. So again, a very, very limited growth. And just a few weeks ago, this slide consisted of just mentioning 4 measures, like the Home Start home purchase program, the expansion of the rural home renovation program, the housing allowance, and the most significant part, the income tax exemption for mothers with 3 children starting this year's October, and then the mothers with 2 children below the age of 40 starting the 1st of January, which means several hundreds of billions of forints for next year's budget. Meanwhile, I could add 2 other measures, the SME loan interest rate subsidy, which is estimated by the government itself around 60 billion forints per year as additional expenditure. And the newest idea, the 14th month pension, the details of which are not yet known. Only the idea was announced, and we know that such a measure can be introduced several ways, like 1 in 1, everybody gets a 14th month pension. But maybe there can be some adjustment so that it's rather targeted for those pensioners whose pension is really low compared to the living standards or the average pension. However, this is not known yet, so that's why only a question mark there, and we cannot judge the effect in foreign terms for next year's budget. But definitely, altogether, these measures will amount to a very significant portion, maybe as high or even exceeding as 1% of GDP. Which has a risk toward our credit ratings. And the meaning of the credit rating is not to comply with the demands of the credit rating agencies, but to follow our own interests. As you remember the first slide, we have the highest debt to GDP ratio within the region. So that's why the credit rating itself has the highest stake for us. Regarding the financing costs of the debt, we are okay, maybe at the moment not in the worst situation, not the single highest financing cost we have in the region, but we are in close competition with Romania. But still, for us, it can have very problematic consequences to find our investment grade ranking. This is just to illustrate that definitely if we would like to not just preserve our credit rating but go for better ratings, this is inevitable to reduce the debt to GDP ratio, because the peers being 1 or 2 notch higher than Hungary have definitely lower debt to GDP ratio than the current ratio for Hungary. And my last thought, and so this leads to the presentation of my Czech colleague Mojmír will speak in more detailed about some of the challenges, is that there are several spending pressures on the budget. So what we need anyway, regardless of the fact whether we have a good budget position or a bad one, regardless of whether we have a good economic situation with high growth or a bad economic situation with a lower growth, is that we have to prioritize much harder than previously. And these challenges mean that one should review the spending side of the budget regardless of the situation, but make a permanent review and keep only the programs which are evidence-based effective, and start only programs where it can be proven that the program will be efficient, either based on experiences from identical or similar programs from abroad, or based on experiences from similar programs within the country, possibly coupled with researches, targeted researches, in order to calculate the long-term effect of such programs. So these were my introductory thoughts to the other presentations and to our roundtable discussion, and I give the floor to my colleague Mojmír. Thank you for your attention.
So, very good morning. Many thanks to Gyula, especially to Gyula, my long-term friend, to Hungarian Economic Association, to Gábor for organizing this event again and inviting me again. Over the dinner yesterday, we discussed whether we are establishing a tradition or not. We will see. We need at least 3 occasions so that we establish a tradition, so we will see the next time around. But anyway, I'm more than pleased to be here again. I will continue in a similar vein as Gábor, and let me remind you what I shared with you the last year within my speaking points. How many things the European economic model has lost over the course of the last 5 to 6 years. Cheap energy from Russia, cheap defense umbrella from the US, the speed of globalization, or rather deglobalization that we have got right now. As of this year, we have got one new uncertainty. We are losing Germany as the ultimate safeguard against over-indebtedness in the whole club of the EU and Eurozone. These are fundamental revolutionary changes appearing in a very short time frame. And we know that there are many challenges for the public finance in many countries in the developed world, and I do consider our countries as an indispensable part of the developed world. And in what kind of environment are we facing these challenges? This is what I want to share with you. I'm talking about dangers ahead, but actually the danger is here. The future is now. Look at this slide. You might recall that we have discussed about the level of public finance debt to GDP in the developed world. This is the chart on the left-hand side. And you might recall that we have debated that even during the COVID, prior to the war, we had in the developed world the debt to GDP, which was above the level at the end of the Second World War, and it was before the war. Right now, look at the chart on the right-hand side. The picture is a bit more bleak and a bit more complicated than we believe, because if we believe in predictions of the IMF, then the debt to GDP in the developed world up until 2029 will be at the level unseen from the end of the Napoleonic Wars, which is by far the highest level that we have observed in the history for which we have got any reasonable numbers. So we are facing new challenges in the area of defense, decarbonization, in the area of changing, transforming the economies, transforming the energy, transforming the way how we tackle the climate in one of the worst occasions in modern history in terms of the public, let's say, in terms of the way how huge space do we have on the side of the public finance. There is no space, basically. In many countries, we are way above what is reasonable and sustainable. This has got, like, you are economists, so this has got consequences that are very straightforward. The capital will be costlier, borrowing will be costlier, we will pay more to borrow in the times when we need to borrow more than ever before. And this is something that needs to be taken into account. It's the secular trend for the yields to go up is here. And if we believe the markets believe that this trend will be here with us for the years to come. The markets do not believe that we will return to the times of great moderation in terms of inflation or nominal interest rates or nominal yields. There's no expectation like that. And now that we are building up new barriers for the flow of capital around the globe, the capital will be scarcer on our side of the globe. This is something that needs to be taken into account. And no doubt that the expectations of the IMF and other noble institutions is that also the proportion of the expenditure that we need to devote to service our debts against the GDP most likely will go up. Will stay where it is or go up. And Gábor has shown an example of Hungary. So suddenly we are in the world that we envisaged, and we were quite unhappy to see this coming with so many headwinds for the European economic model appearing at one point, that we have got so many new and costly priorities for the public finance, yet we do not want to prioritize, we want to pay everything. Once faced with the choice whether we want to pay butter or weapons, we in Europe want both. Butter and weapons. And it's more acute day by day, month by month, year by year in Europe. And in our eyes, this is clearly unsustainable. We have got simply too many costly priorities at the same time and no fiscal space to accommodate all of them. No matter whether you are talking about US, UK, France, Spain, you know, these are incredible things to realize that in Spain, colleagues in Spain do not have a real budget for more than 3 years. They are still have got the provisionary budget as of 2023 because the parliament is unable to vote for a regular budget. You see the political mess in France, which, you know, is around the budget and budgetary issues. So in the developed world, we have got an issue, and basically we haven't got any answer how to tackle all that. We were brave enough to say, as independent economists, that probably we will have to prioritize a bit more. Maybe we will not be able to pay the same amounts on decarbonization and on top of that on defense as before. But it's you might imagine how provocative this sentence was, even in our public space. This is just to explain how huge the gap in the area of defense is. Some of the numbers were shown by Gábor, but there is one picture that shows it quite clearly. Look at the defense spending in European NATO countries ever since 1990 up until 2023. This is this line. So we are way below the level where we started after the fall of the Berlin Wall, even now, and only slightly climbing up. Yet all the other costly priorities of our welfare state went up substantially. Yet we want to keep everything that is above 100% and move the line which is below 100% to the same level. And to have the decarbonization with the current speed to continue, you know, with no fiscal space in many countries. This is the big picture. This is the reality. Do you think that our politicians do want to listen to that? No, not at all. Do your politicians want to listen to that? I've got doubts. Looking at all the countries in Europe, I've got my doubts. Actually, this is a different metrics showing who actually was gaining this peace dividend over the course of the last 30 years. We, as Czechs, were on the winning side, together with Germany, Spain, Italy. There were those investing quite a lot, even in the last couple of years. But those who are on the left-hand side of this chart are those who will have to close the gap if they want to keep their defense within reasonable borders of defensibility of their own countries. So huge it is. Look at the figures. And to add to the worries, we know that the decarbonization is also very costly for the public finance, and especially it is costly in countries with high proportion of energy intensive industries, like Hungary, like Czechia, like Slovakia, like Germany. And this is something that shows the difference. The problem is that for the countries in Central, Eastern, and Southern countries of Europe, the transition is, as a proportion to the GDP, is costlier, right? Because the structure of their economies is so different to the standard Western countries. This is the case for you, this is the case for Dăianu, this is the case for us. We do watch it, and we do calculate how the transition, the energy and climate transition, how much does it cost. These are unbelievable numbers that we do report to the European Commission in the so-called National Climate and Energy Plan. And I can just say very briefly, all of that cannot be financed even in countries with low debt, like the Czech Republic. Even less so in countries with very high debt. And that's everything I wanted to share with you today.
Thank you very much, Mojmír. And well, before I invite Daniel to the floor, I just want to add something that hopefully we can continue this exercise, and we can have the gentleman next year as well with us. And this year we wanted to have also the Polish chairman, but unfortunately it seems that in Poland at this stage they don't have a fiscal council. Hopefully next year they will have, and then we will have an even bigger table here. So I kind of like Daniel to join.
Okay. Well, shall I say good morning? It's no longer early in the morning, but I'm grateful to all of you for the invitation, and I'll tell you something about how I view the international environment. Mojmír has mentioned how enormously difficult the task of the guardians of public finance is becoming day by day. And then I will also talk a little bit about Romania, because a major turnaround is happening. It has started this year. And, but let me this is the portrayal of my presentation. A worsening international institutional context, strains in the EU, and about Romania. Let me tell you a little bit about the worsening international context. So, and I continue along the line of reasoning which I had last year, because in my view, things are getting worse and worse. Fragmentation goes on. But what's new, the rules and institutions are questions, this is very, very bad. Because I mentioned at the very last of this slide, the world becomes chaotic, unruly, and there is the return of realpolitik and the creation of open spheres of influence. This is in the making. Spheres of influence have always operated, but now it's becoming more, let's put it this way, it's more blatant, it's cruel, and it's frightening. Security concerns, geopolitical tensions, military conflicts, and trade warfare. And in my view, there seems to be a new wave of finance deregulation. And this is very bad. It's like we have forgotten the lessons of the last big financial crisis. But some people say, no, but you know, there is a cycle of regulation and then deregulation and so on. And it's like we have to accept it. It's like, and this is mind-boggling. There is, again, intense financial engineering. We have cases of highly leveraged firms and their reverberations, high leverage, opacity, complexity. And the Bank of England, the IMF, have issued warnings. So these are seeds of a new financial crisis, in my view. Crypto assets, which are so much beloved by some people, both in the public, government officials, but the private sector. In my view, these are a new threat to financial stability. I don't want to dwell too much on this. There are pressures on central banks, and we have to ask ourselves, will the independence be dented? Across the ocean, this is quite clear. We have some examples also in Europe, in the EU. And there is a rising fiscal dominance, which may, in the end, force central banks to do what they don't like to do. But it did happen during the pandemic, during the financial crisis. About artificial intelligence, it can enhance productivity, but also it poses risks to financial stability. In the EU, lower economic growth, social and political fatigue due to shocks, and high energy prices. The European Union is handicapped in this regard, as against the United States and China. Inflation has declined in many countries, and monetary policies have come down. But in my view, we'll see inflation creeping upwards again in a world battered by shocks, because it may be that the only way to deal with rising public debts and high deficits will be to have inflation operating, as it has done over many decades. I mean, it's during history. The ECB's policy effectiveness is threatened by all these trends, and the EU competitiveness gap may grow. Draghi's sermons seems to be going in vain. I have some explanation why it's so hard for the EU to pull itself together, but it's not our theme nowadays. A capital markets and investment union, which is seen by Commission officials as a sort of a deus ex machina, I don't buy it. It's not going to happen. We could have a capital markets union, but R&D innovation in the EU will stay behind. It takes much more than a capital markets investment union to foster innovation. As my colleagues have emphasized, defense expenditure is on the rise, and very painful policy trade-offs will have to be made. Mojmír talked about priorities. Although I do part company with Mojmír, because I think climate change is an existential threat. It's not like we have to forget about climate change. Divided societies, weakened policies, social resistance to reforms. I don't want to make comments on data which have been amply presented by my colleagues, but something about the new EU fiscal rules. So many shocks complicate the implementation of fiscal rules. I put on paper a few days ago, as I said, the irrelevance of fiscal rules, and I told myself, no, you are, Daniel, you are too blunt. I mean, we barely need fiscal rules, but the fact is that there are so many shocks that we always have to do something about bending the fiscal rules to help EU member states. In addition, the new rules, although they provide more flexibility for macro corrections, they do not address the basic design flaws of the euro area. We don't have a joint fiscal capacity. We don't have a deposit insurance scheme, a joint. We don't have a safe asset. I'm asking myself, can we replicate what Americans do with the dollar-based stablecoins? And we don't have EU treasuries. It's a safe asset in the EU. So I believe that when it comes to priorities, I believe that cuts in social expenditure and higher tax revenues are needed, are inescapable. I know there is a debate. We had this debate in Romania when embarking on the budget consolidation program, but we have to do both. But the social and political resistance will be enormous. And I will emphasize what I said last year, but I say it constantly in the debates of our network, IFI's network. I believe the national IFIs need a macroprudential approach in their activity. They have to examine monetary policies, social policies, the macroprudential policies of the central banks to see what's going to happen, because in the end, all shocks have fiscal implications, which have to be taken into account. And now it's the big rise in defense expenditure, which can produce havoc in our budgets. Now, Romania's budget conundrum, as you know, Romania has run last year an unbelievably high budget deficit in times of peace, and when there is not a major shock like a pandemic or, let's assume, the country getting into a war. 9.3% of GDP. A very large budget deficit with a twin deficit syndrome, because there is also a pretty large current account deficit, and much of the funding of the current account deficit is through borrowing. So this is clearly unsustainable. And our politicians have, or some of them have totally neglected these situations. They believe that because we have several rounds of elections, this can be tolerated, and then a correction will take place. But it is something to have a correction taking place from a budget deficit of around 5%, and to have to cut the budget deficit from a level above 9%. As you can see, Romania has very low tax revenues. 27% of GDP is against the 40%, the EU average, and 35% in the peer countries. So here one could detect an escape route from this very bad situation, because there is much scope to raise tax revenues. But this is easily said. It can be very hard to undertake. The fact is that this year, the budget consolidation has started, and the program of the current government is to cut the budget deficit from above 9% of GDP to 3% over a period of several years, and stabilize public debt, which currently is about 57% of GDP, while it was 35% of GDP in 2019, and also shift the current account deficit to over 4% of GDP over a period of several years. Let me emphasize something which I believe is quite neglected in our debates, and I think in the network we should open a discussion about it. I believe that the new EU member states, I don't know how many it's much the Czech Republic as a recipient has been getting from it, but I think we have developed a sort of dependency on EU funds. So much of our public investment depends on EU funds that the moment the national recovery and resilience plans end, and we will also see a reduction of EU funds because our income per capita is much higher currently than it used to be, we'll experience a shock. And I worry about potential GDP and our public investment and our economic growth rates. And we may see the middle income trap becoming a reality in our countries. Here I have all the correction. Let me tell you something. It's a very tough program. It's very tough. It's like domestic devaluation. Wages and pensions were frozen for this year, and they are going to be frozen next year as well. The value-added tax creates an inflation tax, a big spike, and it does help the budget consolidation. But this is not, we have to ask ourselves what's going to happen after 2026. In 2026, the budget deficit will come close to 6% of GDP. And this is remarkable, to come down from 9% to 6%. But what comes next? And I believe that just by reducing tax avoidance and tax evasion, we could get much more tax revenues. And also, I believe that progressive taxation is an option. I believe that it does make sense to introduce it. There is a lot of opposition to introducing progressive taxation because, I mean, this is ideology. It's not, this discussion is not rational. We'll see. Anyhow, the tax expenditure will be, will make our task much, much harder. And okay, thank you for your attention, but let's hope for better times. As a matter of fact, I wrote initially, let's pray for better times. But I still believe that human beings are, in the end, are rational. I still believe it. But we don't know, I think. Say, nuclear weapons, existential threat. Artificial intelligence is an existential threat. And then climate change will disappear like dinosaurs because of our own making. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And last but not least, I kindly ask Ján to come and share his thoughts with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm also hoping that this will become a tradition into the future. So I will be happy to come back next year if there is an option. Let me briefly tell you something about the Slovak experience and why it might be interesting to the other countries as well. Is that we just adopted a third fiscal package under the new government that we had elections in 2023, in the late 2023. And so it's a third year in a row that the new government tries to cut the fiscal deficit with relatively sizable fiscal packages. However, the reality is such that the fiscal trends do not improve that much. And I'll try to show maybe why, what kind of inspiration you can get from Slovak experience if in the future a country wants to consolidate more successfully, meaning to bring down the fiscal deficit much lower and on a permanent basis. So one thing that you can notice on this chart is that actually the growth impetus in Slovakia is becoming weaker. Despite the fact that actually the government heavily subsidizes the energy. Up till this year, we had energy prices frozen for households. And for next year, it is planned that 90% of the households will continue to be protected. So despite this stimulus, the headline growth is not very strong compared to the neighboring countries. And also, these are the estimates of potential growth by the European Commission. The growth outlook is subdued. And maybe that's one of the reasons why the consolidation is not so successful in terms of cutting the fiscal deficit to lower levels permanently. So we adopted in the course of 3 years, 3 fiscal packages. These are the sizes. So in each year, the fiscal package was more than 1% of GDP. So the first one was 1.2, the second one 1.5% of GDP, and the one prepared, already passed and prepared for the next year is of 1.2% of GDP. And as you can see, all of these packages are more or less revenue increasing measures. So in total, almost 80% of the fiscal packages focused on increasing taxes and social contributions. So that's relatively unusual. There is this, I would say, consensus that for a successful consolidation, a mix of both expenditure and revenue measures should be adopted, with maybe more focus given to on the expenditure side. So that was not the case for Slovakia. So the total size of the packages was almost 4% of GDP, but again, mostly on the revenues. And also, when you look at the measures and you would label the measures that are more harmful for potential growth. So on the revenue side, it's more direct taxation and social contributions. On the expenditure side, it would be cutting the investment expenditures. So if we label these measures as more, potentially more harmful for future growth, then as you can see, the fiscal packages were constructed in such a way that half of the packages, unfortunately, included this type of measures that into the future might be more anti-growth than, say, cutting the current expenditures or increasing wealth or consumption taxes or taxes on negative externalities. And basically this resulted, so after the 3 packages next year, Slovakia should have the highest public revenue as percent of GDP in the history of independent Slovakia. And at the same time, there is a tendency for fiscal deficit to revert back to 5% levels. 5% levels are the levels that the new government inherited from the previous one. So these are the deficit figures, headline deficit figures, and you can see the energy subsidies and defense spending. Looking at the fiscal trajectory, so after the 3 packages, so the first full year of the new government was 2024. The deficit at the time of elections was 4.9%. And as you can see, the fiscal deficit tends to decrease slightly below 5%, but medium term, it reverts back to 5% of GDP. So that is something that, of course, raises the question why, after these sizable fiscal packages, the deficits are still relatively unchanged. And there are 3 reasons. The first one was that at the same time the government was adopting these fiscal packages, it was not shy to introduce new expenditures. The most famous case for Slovakia is a full 13th pension, but there were also new expenditures in the area of healthcare, education, and some other current expenditures, not so much the investment expenditures. So these, of course, then directly cut into the potential of fiscal packages to cut the fiscal deficit. The second thing is that I already showed was the structure and mix of the consolidation. It seems that with more benign growth into the future, you need to consolidate more to cut the fiscal deficit. And also some of the measures that were adopted were of temporary nature, both on the revenue and expenditure side. So of course, then this temporary nature calls for additional consolidation to happen into the future. Last but not least, and this one is a sort of objective factor why the fiscal deficits are not falling, and it's defense investment. Basically, in terms of defense expenditures, they increased permanently to 2% of GDP levels, while before the levels were between, say, 1.1 to 1.4%. So we lost a sizable piece dividend in this area. And with defense expenditures expected to rise permanently to higher levels, this is clearly a headwind that the government is facing. So some part of the fiscal packages will not show up in terms of lower deficit because they need to compensate for this objective need to increase the defense spending to more normal levels around 2% of GDP. Of course, what the government can do in such a situation that it's facing the headwinds, one solution would be to use the sizable EU funds, including the recovery fund, to support the economy when consolidation happens. Of course, it's much easier to say in theory. In practice, the things went as usual. So in terms of the EU funds, there is the usual very gradual implementation over the new program period, meaning that the government did not actively use EU funds to push them to be concentrated during the time of consolidation. And also with the recovery fund, the take-up is as usual, so concentrated at the end of the program. So EU funds were not, it's not very easy, but still they were not used very actively to offset the consolidation period. So what's happening to public debt after these three fiscal packages? You can see this is the trajectory. Public debt continues to rise. So these three packages were not able to, they stabilized the fiscal deficit trends at around 5%, which of course is not enough to stabilize the debt. For a country like Slovakia into the future, you would need a 2.5% fiscal deficit to stabilize the debt to GDP. So this situation continues to be unsustainable, with debt rising to ever higher levels into the future. And we also, as a fiscal council, we are mandated to watch also the long-term trends. So we need to compute this long-term sustainability indicator, which measures how much you would need to consolidate to stabilize the debt in 50 years' time at the level of 50% of GDP. So, of course, you have all the demographics and other trends impacting the numbers. And here, the fiscal sustainability improved somewhat, especially with the second of the three packages, but still tends to go back to levels between the medium risk and high risk. So basically it means that in order to stabilize the debt at 50% of GDP in 50 years' time, the government would, in theory, would need to immediately consolidate by 4.6% of GDP. This is what the indicator says. And when you look at the history of it, you can see that we actually made the biggest damage to the long-term sustainability just ahead of the COVID crisis during relatively good times in the economy. So it was due to very pro-cyclical fiscal policy, as you can see in 2019. there was the worst annual worsening of the indicator. And of course, the COVID crisis, and especially the energy, the war in Ukraine, which meant energy shock, but also defense shock, that also is increasing the need to consolidate because it puts the defense expenditures at permanently higher levels. And last but not least, you can ask, okay, if you have all, the domestic fiscal policy like this, are the new EU rules beneficial for a country like Slovakia? Can at least EU rules exert some more pressure on fiscal authorities to stabilize the public debt? Because the new EU rules, as you know, are calculated in such a way that they should guarantee that the fiscal debt will stabilize into the future. However, the way how they were implemented was basically meant that these EU rules are not a big help for fiscal stabilization, because they were implemented in such a way that they assumed certain unrealistic assumptions about the revenues to GDP into the future. And there were some, let's say, errors in estimating the future that there was no adjustment taken once the realized inflation was lower than the one assumed at the time when they were computed. And also there was a relatively generous escape clause for defense. So basically, the new EU rules, should you adhere only to the new EU rules, would allow as high deficit of as 4.7% of GDP by 2028. So they are not really helping. And this is the last picture. Basically, the EU rules, they wanted to have a fiscal debt trajectory as depicted by the black line. So that was what they assumed. Once you fully adhere to the new EU rules, then this should be a stabilization of debt below 60% of GDP into the future. And the latest development is such that in reality, if we fully adhere to the new EU rules, we would get the blue line. So the brown line is no policy change. The blue line is the development of public debt if a country fully adheres to the EU rules. So actually, the Slovak government was stricter than what the EU rules allowed. But as you can see, there is a big failure of new EU rules to guarantee the stabilization of the debt. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ján, and to all of you for your thoughts. And let me start with a rather general question, which could be interesting for everyone, or could be important for everyone. The Council of the European Union has issued new guidelines on the budgetary procedure and on the rule of the fiscal councils. So the fiscal councils seems to have more power, not only they issue an opinion on the budget, but they have to evaluate the budget. So do you think that it would help the governments and the fiscal policy to consolidate or to go ahead with the consolidation, or you think it wouldn't mean too much? As far as I know, in Hungary, the government plans to introduce this new way of budgetary procedure from 2027, but I don't really know how the other countries plan. So who would like to start?
Well, for case like Slovakia, so you mean the new EU directive that needs to be adopted by the end? It doesn't change that much, and it's also because Slovakia has had a fiscal council for quite many years. So it basically maybe it's more helpful for countries that have that don't have a fiscal council or have a fiscal council in much say in a smaller size, or that you know, the directive is very helpful in it should guarantee enough resources and independence of the fiscal council. In Slovakia, the fiscal council is protected by the Constitutional Act. So this is more probably helpful for countries outside of Slovakia. But in terms of having the impact, I would say the directive does not go far enough for fiscal council to have more direct impact than would be the case today in Slovakia, at least for Slovakia.
I believe that fundamentally it doesn't change. It doesn't change. Fiscal councils are not involved in policy making. They are accountable for the quality of their work if they observe their mandate, but the fiscal council are not involved in policy making. They may influence policy making. But what changes the mindset of policymakers are markets, financial markets, EU funds, and this is it. And the pressure of public opinion in a democracy. I know the Commission wants fiscal councils to become more involved, but very concretely, when I ask those who speak on behalf of the Commission, how? To go beyond making analysis, evaluations. What does it mean going beyond that? So I'm skeptical. I think we should have resources. Some of the IFIs do not have resources, and it's also a matter of pay. To have a good pay so that we should be able to attract good economies to undertake our analysis, but otherwise.
Okay, so to continue, I would divide your question into two parts: the new rules as such, in general, and then the roles of the role of IFIs in these new rules. The first part, I'm slightly skeptical, like Daniel. I think we are heading in a direction where the rules are not entirely comprehensible even to the policymakers themselves. They are very hard to decipher sometimes, even for professionals, but the rules should be as understandable and as comprehensible for the policymakers so that they understand what these numbers mean. I do not know what's the experience with your political elite, with your respective countries, but for instance, to explain the rule of the growth of net expenditure is not an easy task. Like to explain what it means and where it hurts and where it doesn't hurt. It was very complicated after so many years, to explain the role of the structural budget. Even the structural deficit number was quite complicated, not very intuitive for many politicians. This, I don't know. I think if you should have rules that govern something, then those who are being governed by these rules must understand and must adhere and must be, very much in line with what is inside. So we end up in a world where the only two figures that politicians do understand is -3 and 60%. -3 deficit, 60% debt, and in many countries, they are not adhering to them anyway. So I'm somewhat skeptical, and I'm somewhat skeptical towards the ability of the Commission to enforce, because the political Commission has, you know, turning the Commission into a political body, not a technocratic body, means that their ability to enforce will be lower, it seems to me, than in the past. And at the same time, this is what I have mentioned, you have got the biggest player, Germany, most likely within the excessive deficit procedure within a couple of years. So the biggest player actually should be punished for breaking the rules as well. So how in this universe can you enforce anything from the European level, like consistently? So my worry is that more and more the importance of what is happening on the national front will be important than what is happening on the pan-European front, and that the genuine willingness to behave responsibly on the national level will be more important than ever. And this is the second part. I think here the IFIs can play a role, but they will play the role within the national context. It seems to me, by explaining what is sustainability, what are the risks. And we assume, or we expect in our case, in Czech case, that we will be much more important for the public policy debates in the future than in the past. We are playing our role, but we will play it probably even more, because there will be no one else, no other independent institution willing to play this unenviable role. And seen from this perspective, the changed role of IFIs in the European legislation, I agree, it doesn't change that much. I think it will be more on us to do our job in our context.
Yeah. Well, I think that still with
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add maybe a little bit on the optimistic side, that actually the new EU directive is a good thing, but it's more in the area of maybe protecting the independence of fiscal council, not maybe pushing them into much greater progress. But as you saw in the presentations, there will be ahead huge fiscal pressures. And of course, for the government, sometimes they can solve some of the problems in the public debate by downsizing the fiscal council's voice. And this new directive is a good measure to provide some protections for the independence of fiscal council.
Yeah, this might be the case. But what I see is still with the new framework, theory and practice move against each other. Even in the old setup, the 26 countries within the EU which have independent fiscal institutions or similar bodies have more than 26 types of these. So some countries have more than one. And the new framework did not change that, emphasizing the so-called national ownership. And Mojmír pointed to that most probably what happens on national level will be more important in the coming years. Because theoretically, I think all the decision makers, the national governments and the EU agree that a framework for maintaining the fiscal prudence is important and useful. However, when it comes to the practice, we end up with a review of the framework where the original proposal made by the Commission and the Parliament was amended significantly by the members. And you mentioned the Council issued it. Yes, at the end of the day, it was rather according to the thoughts of the Council, so the member states. And that's why some of the introduction of the new measures was postponed into the far future. So yeah, practice works against theory sometimes. even in very specific cases when, for instance, a breach of measures versus an excessive deficit procedure for one country, but not necessarily the same for another one.
Well, thank you. Now, let's move to the practical things. So we saw the big picture, and on the basis of the big picture, the situation is not that bad in our region because of the debt to GDP ratios seems to be relatively low compared to the EU, to the OECD, to the US level. At the same time, however, there are a lot of challenges we have to face, and a lot of measures have the governments introduced to keep the debt level at the same level, or just or to keep it at an acceptable level. But at the end of the day, this leads to a lower purchasing power for the population, for the households, and in each of our countries, the households' consumption contributes in large part into the growth. So, if the purchasing power of the households reduces, then it will harm the growth. So it then may require more financing space, and it can introduce the debt and the cost of the debt. So how do you see this? Could it be a vicious circle, or could we get out of this? Yeah.
If I may, I understand the question, Gyula, and maybe this is one of the reasons why the incoming new government in our country declares quite clearly that they will never implement the ETS2, for instance. Which is, you know, quite tricky because you've got the European law and etc. We understand each other, and it's very much aligned with what you say, because the biggest worries are about the purchasing power of households after the times of very high inflation which came after the COVID. So I agree, and it will be trickier. But no matter what is happening on the side of households, and no matter how huge the difference between the level of debt in the countries more to the west and countries more to the east, simply the pressures are mounting, and as I said, I'm clearly convinced that they are not financeable without taking a look at priorities and starting prioritizing again. Without that, I think it's the same challenge for France and Spain and the same challenge for Hungary and Czechia or Romania.
Yeah. So you mentioned that the region is in a relatively better situation concerning the debt to GDP ratio. However, the reason why I tend to agree with Mojmír is that despite the lower debt to GDP ratios, the exposure of the countries is higher because we are small, open economies. And regarding the consumption, I think the best thing governments can do in such countries is to provide the stable circumstances so that the growth rate of consumption is at its natural pace, not higher, not lower, in order to avoid disruption, at least from the consumption side to the growth rate. However, the challenges are not smaller because of the fact that we are more exposed. And even despite the lower debt to GDP ratio, whenever it comes to crisis, the countries will be found by the markets. And unfortunately, because Hungary has the highest debt to GDP ratio in the country, traditionally we are found at the first place.
Now, I think we have a long-lasting cost of living crisis, and we will not overcome it. In my view, I believe in Europe. I believe in Europe and probably in the United States as well. I mean, their public debt is not sustainable either, unless they allow higher inflation. So it's going to be, we have to say it, it's very cynical what I'm saying. But we have postponed a day of reckoning. And in addition, we have this sequence of major shocks from the financial crisis, the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis. As I said, Europe is handicapped in this regard. And the bottom line is the cost of living crisis. Can you convince people that it's not going to be better in the future unless we change ourselves? We should accept lower consumption. We should be more modest. I mean, we should not run after all kind of fancy goods. I mean, change our cars. I mean, it's every 2 years. And so we have to change. It's very hard in consumer societies. I mean, it's in this kind of society, it's very tough, very tough. And I believe that this is why governments will have a very hard time. Even very good governments will not be able to satisfy people. And we may see more social unrest, more. And so it's pretty bad. Can artificial intelligence provide, I mean, I'm highly skeptical about it. Artificial intelligence can dislocate people, can destroy jobs, and can destroy us, human beings, unless we are careful about it. So it's, we in the Fiscal Councils, the finances, we look at the ratios and so on, but there are things which go beyond these ratios. It's about society at large, what's happening. Our educational standards are going down. People no longer read. They no longer think properly. So we should be worried. It's not only about the budget deficit. It's about a culture deficit. It's about an education deficit. It's not only about investment. The quality of investment. What do we do with the money we assign to investment? So there will be more speculation. We see, again, a financial sector that may, again, go crazy. Just, yes, but he wants to be more optimistic than I am. He's on the side of optimism.
I'm not sure if this time, but okay. So one thing that when you look at the debt to GDP ratios that you don't see there is the change that's going to happen because of demography. So, for example, Slovakia is a very young population. In terms of aging, we will have the second strongest aging in Europe. So, at present time, the pension expenditures to GDP are lower than in Western Europe. In Western Europe, many countries the aging started many years ago. So we will have more fiscal pressures coming from changing demography than it would be in Western Europe. And the second thing is, I think for, Slovakia and Hungary, Czech Republic as well, these are very extremely small open economies that I think the success story in terms of living standards into the future is to have as high potential growth as possible, and which should be probably export-oriented sort of business model. So I think our experience is that when you consolidate, maybe that's the thing that you should protect the most. And in terms of having enough domestic stimulus for domestic growth, like consumption, I think one should use the EU funds. For Slovakia, these EU funds, these are huge numbers as percent of GDP. So why not use EU funds to protect the domestic demand at the times of consolidation, as opposed to not to consolidate because we don't want to have a negative demand stimulus?
Let me add something. As you say, we are small economies, open economies, okay. But for years we've been seeing it in the most advanced part of the Union. So, low investment, okay, buffeted governments, I mean, it's productivity gains, pretty small. Everybody's betting on the capital and investment union. It's like something which should come from God. So, handicapped by the energy cost as against the United States and China. And we are small, open economies, heavily dependent on the developed part or the most advanced part of the Union. If that part of the Union, which is pretty large, stagnates, and we depend on this part, we're not open enough in the sense of trading with other parts of the world, with the most dynamic regions of the world. What's going to happen? We are going to sink because we are small, open economies. You say EU funds. Okay, yeah, for how long? The recovery and resilience plans are coming to an end next year. Our income per capita now is substantially higher than it used to be 20, 30 years ago. So there'll be a reduction of the EU funds for us. So I think we'll have to experience, we'll see a shock because we got used to using EU funds, we'll see EU funds declining because the Union wants to spend more for defense, for competitiveness. And so I think we should open ourselves to the most dynamic regions of the world. You would argue, yes, but it's hard. You cannot, geography is geography. There is gravity. It's true. And there are also blocks, okay, regional blocks. The Union will be a block. Because the world is fragmenting. But still, we have to think, are we stuck with the declining Union? Because this is what I'm watching. And people in Brussels are very concerned. Draghi is very concerned. He produced a report. And what happened with that report? And then you have the issues linked with financial stability. Trade wars, no rules, more defense expenditure. What shall we go? We should go to churches and pray?
It will not help.
No, this is what I'm saying. It's not going to help. I would not bet so much on EU funds. We have to find ourselves something.
Just one remark. You said the phrase cost of living standard, but then you mentioned all elements, what we could call a performance crisis. So cost of living crisis comes from a performance crisis. And when I mention natural growth rate of consumption, most probably it should be a lower rate than in the previous decades, unless the continent is willing to perform more. So if we try to compete when we say that, not now, but a few years ago, Well, we considered to introduce a 35 hours long working week instead of the 40 hours. Meanwhile, in some other parts of the world, people are working 60, 70 hours a week and still maintain our consumption level. It's not possible. So either we increase the performance, all of us, I mean on the continent, or accept a lower consumption or lower consumption growth rate. Plus, on the other hand, anyway, even if we increase our performance, the mounting spending pressures, which will need more investment, which will need more capital, means that anyway, we have to set aside a greater portion of our output for savings and investment than for consumption.
May I just add something? Because Daniel always inspires us, you know, to go deeper in our thinking about the public finance. And there's one thing that I would like to share with you and with you. It's our observation that the bigger and the deeper is the political conflict in a given country, the worse the state of the public finance. You know, like the old adage of Aeschylus, that the first casualty of a war is the truth. Then, in our case, the first casualty of a political war is always the state budget. And here I totally agree with Daniel that the politicians will have hard time managing all that, because as long as you have got the political scene fragmented even more, then to keep the budget in order will be more and more complicated. Look at our case. We consolidated slightly in 2023, and the finance minister responsible for this consolidation package was now in the general election not even elected to the parliament. Not only for the reason of the consolidation, but it was a part of that. Because we, and again, is it in your country similar or not, we shifted the debate in the public sphere so much from wealth creation to wealth redistribution. This is like imminent everywhere and an indispensable part of all the debates, that we are discussing wealth redistribution, not wealth creation. And it means that if you have got limits on debts and deficits, and you have got some DNA like Czechs do have, that you should not get into problems of over-indebtedness, you, without any doubt, get into a corner, and we are in this corner, where the electorate requires three things that are mutually absolutely exclusive. Electorates require lower taxes, a higher public spending, and cutting the deficit and debt at the same time. And only the politicians that are capable of producing in one sentence a promise which covers all these three things are to some extent able to mobilize the critical part of the population. So I believe that the finance ministers will have a hard time, because either they will be criticized that they are too loose and increasing the debt, or that they will be criticized that they are too strict and they are harming the living standards of their respective populations. And frankly, I've got no idea how to get out of this trap. I do not know how to get out of this trap of huge wars, deep wars, having it with the impact on public finance, and from the mode of wealth redistribution to wealth creation. I do not know how does one make that without first the system hitting the wall to some extent. And here again, those with higher capacity and higher fiscal space will be in better position than those with lower fiscal space. So my entire belief is that our work is not useless, because even if we save a bit of the fiscal space for worse times, it's still better than to consume it everywhere right now. Because in our debate, and again, I will speak rather about our situation, somehow it became popular to say In some other countries in Western Europe, the debts to GDP are far higher, and they are surviving somehow. So why not to use this space right now, in 2 or 3 or 4 years? But, you know, what we are describing and what we are saying by all these charts is exactly the opposite is true. It should be a cautionary tale. You should never get there to that point. But it's so much more complicated with this divided and fragmented political elite and electorate which is being promised basically everything. Then 10% of debt to GDP, it seems like nothing, right? Why not to spend it? And how to resist this, I do not know, but we will have to find some answer as independent bodies. It's my strong view.
You had a chart in Mojmír in your presentation on the confidence indices of the public and probably the corporates as well, so the market participants. Yes. And it's surprisingly low, even in the Czech Republic. So my guess is that, the strong public confidence is definitely needed to support the growth and, you know, to...
We discussed it over the dinner. It seems to me that it's like from Paul Valéry. The future is not what it used to be. We have got a very much destroyed expectations about the future in many countries in Europe, and this takes its toll. Again, in the Czech case, it's quite nice and for you counterintuitive that you ask the people, are you basically fine and okay? They say, well, in my own private life, everything is fine. Well, I just hate the political debate and politicians, you know? That's and it very much influences then the atmosphere. That's true. And the political wars, I believe that deep and long-lasting political wars within the nations that are not by definition radicals, and Czechs are not by definition radicals, has got an impact on the behavior also of the public finance and on the state of the public finance. That's my observation, and I'm somewhat frustrated by that.
Well,
we have also to consider, because you said, have you said trust?
Yep.
Have you said trust?
Yep.
Okay. Trust is very low almost all over the world. And we have to ask ourselves, even in societies which are doing, I would say, quite well, why trust is so low? I mean, the political establishment is derided, doesn't enjoy the support of people, but there should be a political establishment because we live in democracies. I mean, and there should be governments which stay and then go, other political parties replace them and so on. But then, why trust is so low? There are social phenomena. There is a new generation. It's the social media. There is so much at play. And social media can be highly disruptive. We debate about truth. We question solid scientific knowledge. I mean, some of our fellows say that, I mean, climate change does not exist as a matter of fact, it doesn't matter, or we question the usefulness of vaccines, and so on. These are fundamental issues. These are fundamental issues. And, I mean, a population is not going to go desperate, to become desperate about the budget deficit. Only if markets no longer fund the deficit. But the population may become desperate, for example, if vaccines are not found, are not available, or medicine is not available because of the very high prices of medicine and so on. When we say prioritize, we have to go more deeply. It's not only about that project versus that project. I mean, we have to give healthcare and education highest priority. Because investment in education, spending for education is investment. But some people say it's not investment. Investment is only buying machinery and equipment and building a road, and we are crazy about GDP growth rates. Why? I know the rating agencies will immediately react if the growth rates start to decline. Okay? There is something wrong with the model, the economic model, the way we operate and destroy our habitat and our natural resources. But again, this is not a theme for our panel nowadays. But in the end, everything comes down, and we'll see it in our public expenditure, we said. If we, for example, end all wars, big wars, end them in one way or another, in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, if we don't end wars, we'll have to spend more and more on defense. Where are we going to take the money from? Of course, we'll end up with a Cold War. We'll spend for defense, but not to the tune of 4 or 5% of GDP. I mean, I would say that is unbelievable. I mean, think about our budgets, deficits, with a defense expenditure of 5% of GDP. Okay, Poland has 5% of GDP, but it has a budget deficit of 6. And Poland is stuck. I'm sorry to say it, because I think the Poles have done great things in the economic realm, but they are stuck now.
May I just add something? We are returning to the smell of the debate from the last year, because we debated this exactly the last year.
Yeah, but it's even more.
Yeah. But I would warn against one thing. We sometimes use technical terms, and when we put them into the political debate, political elite has got a tendency to abuse these words. So that's how in many countries, including ours, the word investment has been so many times politically abused, because it looks nice. So whenever you label any expenditure as an investment, suddenly it is a very nice expenditure. So that's why some of our politicians said we have to increase the pensions, because this is the investment into pensioners. But that's why I say you have to be very careful. You have to be very careful.
We have to take care of pensions,
You know?
but not to invest in pensions.
That's why I say, Daniel, we have to be cautious. We have to.
In education,
and we have to be preemptive in using some terms in a way which can easily be abused. That's also our role.
Well, we are just slowly running out of time. I didn't want to touch upon the EU funds, because mentioning it is always painful for us. But there's maybe one thing that I don't really know, but I hope that the fiscal councils may have sometime the power to force the fiscal policy to be rather straightforward. I mean, the temporary should mean temporary, and the permanent should mean permanent, because it could really improve the trust. So, you know, to change the rules from one day to another could cause a lot of uncertainty, and this could hamper the investments which which are important. So again, you mentioned the EU funds, and the EU funds really help to overcome some difficulties in the budgets and difficulties in the investments. Unfortunately, in Hungary, they have less role now, but I think that it would be a good challenge the fiscal councils could shoulder in the future. So I don't really know if you have any comment to that.
No, just maybe the last one, but you will comment on EU funds as well, I assume, from your perspective. From our perspective, I think the ministries and the government and also the parliament are preparing themselves for the day of reckoning when we will switch from the position of net recipient to a net contributor. And in terms of fiscal institutions or public institutions, there is more pressure and more demand on financing of many public projects with financial instruments rather than direct subsidies, because there won't be subsidies, easy money anymore. That's point number one. Point number two. The next budgeting period for the EU will be one of the most complicated, and to compose the budget, in my eyes, will be very, very, very complicated, because the EU budget has got exactly the same problem as the national budgets. It's overburdened with priorities. You have got the old priorities, like farmers, like the existing size of cohesion, and then you add to that reconstruction of Ukraine, defense, etc. And on top of that, you should start repaying the old debt from the next gen EU, which should consume 16% of all the expenditure of the EU budget. So the problem is exactly the same. Too many priorities and inability to say which of them has got a budget. Yeah. Well,
I mean, McDougall.
Okay, but Daniel
report said in the 70s, many decades ago, said, for the union to function, we need a budget of the union of 4-5% of GDP. Yeah.
Okay,
it's not only many priorities.
Yeah,
it's a very tiny budget for the challenges the union is facing. And the union is becoming more and more geopolitical. We do not integrate more deeply, so that we should be more solid as a union. There is a huge reluctance to integrate more deeply, for good reason. I understand why. National prerogatives are very, very strong. And the union is becoming more geopolitical. More enlargement with the Western Balkans, in the neighborhoods and so on, with very limited resources. It's like a Goliath. I mean, it's with very, how to say?
No, fine.
With very, very weak feet. Very weak feet. I mean, it's...
But Daniel, one has to be a realist, and we have to be realistic. This red line in many countries to increase the contribution to the EU. Simply, it's a non-starter. It will not happen. No. It will not happen.
What I'm saying is just what I'm watching. It's not, I'm saying what should be done.
Maybe two remarks. The first one is uncertainty, because I think that's a very good point. And you can draw some lessons also from how we did the consolidation that was not so successful in cutting the fiscal deficit in 3 rounds. In each round, the government announced the measures every year, only 2-3 months before year end. So the households, companies, they were all nervous. They couldn't prepare for it because those announcements were often text changes. So it would be much better way to, at the start of the government period, to announce a multi-year consolidation plan. This is how we're gonna increase taxes, how we're gonna cut expenditures. So they will guarantee the households and companies a certain tax stability, even though, you know, that in 1 year we're going to increase this tax, in 2 years this and this, so they will not be in constant surprise mode. And of course, if you have such a high uncertainty, investments from both companies and households gonna suffer, because in uncertainty, you just, you are in uncertain mode that you will spend only the minimum amounts. So that's one. So it's more advisable to present a multi-year fiscal consolidation plan without all these, for example, tax surprises to households and companies every year. And the second thing is, I mean, this discussion was relatively skeptical in terms of the political process and fragmentation. I think fragmentation is also very bad. But there might be a hope that at some point the voters will remunerate more politicians that will provide some sort of a vision or common goal, hope. And if that's the case, it would be much easier than to also to consolidate the public financing and so forth. So fragmentation is the enemy.
Okay. On the closing remark? Or?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering how good a closing remark this will be. We cannot avoid to mention the political aspects of some of the budgetary issues, but I try to be as technocratic as possible concerning the EU funds you mentioned. Hungary is in the testing of being in a role where EU funds are partially frozen for the country. To be honest, I have ambivalent feelings towards the EU subsidies, to all kinds of subsidies, based on my experience in the competition sector. I started the personal example 25 years ago when I started my career, and we had to make the family budget from much, much less resources. We devoted much more time and effort to plan it, how to spend the much less money available. Now I feel that we devote less effort and less time in order to plan it. So I see a tendency where you have free money, then you spend it easier, despite the fact that the uncertainty is there, as Ján mentioned, anyway. It's in the word, even without governments adding to the uncertainty with frequently changing rules. So this is a fact you have to consider. It is really the best timing to spend this money and to invest for this particular project. With an EU fund, you don't have this type of question, because there are deadlines and you have to spend it anyway if you're eligible for the funds. On the other side, no question, without the freezing and having 100% of the otherwise available EU funds for Hungary, it would mean higher investment and it would mean higher growth for the country. So this would be positive on the short term anyway, no doubt in that. However, I think, and this is again something we mentioned already last year, it would be very, very crucial to assess more carefully and more deeply the efficiency and effectiveness of a particular project spent. And this type of reliance on subsidies, either being EU or national, can be touched within the society and on country level as well. I think it was Daniel who mentioned that there's a huge reliance on public investment on the EU funds, and once it gets lower, not because of kind of punishment as against Hungary, but because of times changing and the transfer will be less toward the region, it might be a shock, because even on the country level, we are reliant concerning the big investment project on such type of subsidies. And I think this what should be changed, but this is very hard to change. You asked for the role of the fiscal councils. The politicians have tough time anyway. What we can do is sit together, talk about these issues so that it gets out to the public via the press, and do our part, the risk management part, and warn to these aspects of how we use public money.
Thank you very much. I think it was an excellent closing remark and a very good point to continue from at our next meeting. So the importance of the careful and responsible planning and spending the budget resources. So thank you very much for attending this panel. Thank you very much for your open and professional comments. And thank you for the audience for listening us, and see you next time.
Thank you.
Now I have to ask Professor Peter Bod to come up with his presentation. At the same time, let me say goodbye to Dăianu because he has to leave immediately, and hope to see him again.
Kedves kollégák, hölgyeim és uraim, magyarul fogom folytatni ezt a két nyelvű konferenciát, mert az a 10 dia, amit készítettem, magyarul van. Nagyon nagy izgalommal hallgattam, és szívesen bele is szóltam volna az elnökök vitájába, de hát nem ez a feladat, hanem hogy megkezdjük a magyar ügyeknek a tárgyalását. Most ugye Cserhát Ilona szokta tartani, de nem ért el, tehát elnézést kérek, hogy most én prezentálom a közös munkánkat. Néhány területen azonban szóba fog jönni mindaz a témakör, amit az elnökök szóba hoztak, tehát nem fogom tudni elkerülni a rövid reagálást. Azzal kezdem, ami teljesen nyilvánvaló, hogy milyen a fejlettségünk, ez azért lényeges, mert az egyik elnök úr megemlítette, hogy mi ugye fejlett országok vagyunk. Hát, ugye azért ez egy vitatható ügy, ha megnézzük, hogy hol van a magyar gazdaság valamelyik mutatóban, és a mutatóknak a apróbetűit most félreteszem, akkor azért azt lehet látni, hogy a magyar egyfőre jutó bruttó hazai termék, ahogy mérjük, ahogy hozzá lehet mérni, az tulajdonképpen hát végül is az európai rangsornak a végén van, és ahhoz a csapathoz tartozik, amely tulajdonképpen hát mondjuk Észtország és Bulgária között a peremvidék, és hogy fejlett-e, developed, az hangzott el, hát a tőkepiaci besorolása például Magyarországnak az nagyon sok klasszifikációban inkább emerging market, vagy pedig developing market. Tehát a IMF-nek a térképén mi nem fejlettekként szerepelünk, a csehek igen, mi azonban nem. És ugye itt a Csehország elhangzott, hogy a cseh 91% és a magyar 70-valahány között van némi kis különbség. Szóval minden esetre induljunk ki abból, hogy az az ország, amelynek a gazdasági fejlődését és az államháztartásnak a fenntarthatóságát ma meg kell beszélnünk délutánig, nem fejlett országa szónak a Európa értelmében, a globális értelemben természetesen hát a másik 170-80 ENSZ tagországhoz képest igen. Na most konvergál-e, és akkor ez a másik történet, hogy konvergálgat, de azért az a konvergencia, ha veszünk egy hosszabb időszakot, az olyan, amilyen, és ez a magyar konvergencia, ez nem különösen jó. Az elmúlt 3 év az különösen vacak volt, ez 24-jel zárul, a 25-ös adat az még lejjebb hozna minket, hiszen 25-ben Magyarországon nem lesz konvergencia az uniós átlag, az Európai Uniós átlag GDP-ben nő mondjuk 1%-kal, másféllel, amiben nőünk egy féllel. És ez volt tavaly is, ez volt idén is, és az a rossz hír, hogy nagyon nagy konvergencia a mi kalkulációnk szerint nem lesz. Itt majd kíváncsi vagyok, hogy a többi kollégának mi jött ki. És akkor el lehet mondani, hogy hát van valami felzárkózás, de ez a felzárkózás nagyon lassú, és a kilátások is olyanok, amilyenek. No, Tehát ráadásul azt lehet látni, hogy ebben a térségben, amiről mi beszélünk, ebben a Csehország már feljebb van, Észtország már feljebb van, de abban a hátsó 6-8 pozícióban pedig nagyon eltérő az utolérési teljesítmény. Ez talán a kiinduló helyzet, és akkor ennek fényében kell ránézni arra, ami történt az elmúlt években. Na most szemben azzal, amit nagyon befolyásos emberek mondtak annak idején, hogy a kanyarba kell előzni, amit sosem ajánlok senkinek, gyerekeinknek, a magyar gazdaság ismert módon a kanyarba szokott lemaradni. És nem annyira meglepő, hogyha megnézzük, hogy a visegrádiakhoz képest mi történt velünk, amikor baj van a világban, akkor ez a magyar jármű, amelyik egy megrakott teherautó, túl van pakolva, meg van nehezítve az államháztartási hiánnyal, különböző strukturális gondokkal és azon kívül, amit úgy hívjuk, hogy mechanizmusbeli gondokkal, a belső működésnek a bajaival. Lehet látni, hogy amikor gond van, baj van, akkor az a magyar sötétkék vonal, az a többiek alatt van, pontosan akkor kerülnek elénk azok, akik mögöttünk voltak, és akkor húznak el azok, akik egyébként is előttünk voltak. És tulajdonképpen emögött kell, hogy legyen valami logika, és mikor megnézzük a mostani időszakot, akkor azt lehet látni, a 26, 27, 28 ezen esetleg segíthet. Ugye a Tóth elnök úrnak a prezentációjában Magyarországban van egy nagyon gyönyörű megemelkedés, majd 2027-28-ba, uvidím, meglátjuk majd, de amit most látható, ez a 3 év azt mutatja, hogy a magyar gazdaság beragadt, és ez azért is nagyon lényeges, mert lehet arra következtetni, hogy olyan strukturális tényezők állnak fenn, amelyek nem konjunkturális jellegűek, tehát nehéz arra számítani, hogy jó, volt 2-3 rossz év, de most ma jön a következő jó. Egyébként, hogy ez strukturális-e, és vagy konjunkturális-e, nagyon kíváncsi vagyok, hiszen az utolsó előadás azt hiszem pont erről fog szólni. Mint első előadó nekem megadatik az, hogy bizonyos témákat szóba hozzak anélkül, hogy definitív választ adnék rá. Az én válaszom az, hogy valószínűleg strukturális, nekünk a számításainkból a bizonyos mérési, elemzési mód alapján az jött ki. No, mi történt ezekben az években? Tehát valóban most ez egy stagfláció-e, ez egy csapdahelyzet. Van, amit tudunk, van, amit nem tudunk. Ugye azt tudjuk, hogy a 2023-ban csökkent, 24-ben, 25-ben épp csak, hogy nőtt a magyar GDP, 22 nyarához képest egy centit se vagyunk előbbre. Eközben azért, ugye mi történt? Hát az infláció az makacs, az output az nem nőtt, ami nőtt, azok a bérek, és ugye hát a bérnövekedés az magával hozza azt, hogy van reál és nettó átlagkeresett növekmény. A bérnövekedésről csak annyit, hogy volt egy időszak, amikor annak volt egy trendje, a 2010-es évek eleje, ez a 4%-os körüli nominál átlagbér emelkedés, és utána jöttek ezek a nagyon furcsa és nehezen értelmezhető és az akkori normát maguk mögött hagyó béralakulások, és ezek arra utalnak, hogy valami olyan strukturális változás van a magyar gazdaságban, plusz a magyar gazdaságpolitikában, amelyek miatt nagyon nehéz kalkulálni az, hogy mi is lesz. Hát azt látjuk, hogy a 2023-as hatalmas infláció után értelemszerűen a nominálbérek felszaladtak, és most ez az ütem csökken, és nem egészen látjuk, hogy pontosan mi lesz. Itt a politikai ciklus szerepet játszik. Nos, ezt látjuk, ezt tudjuk, és akkor ebből persze következik sok minden. Az is az a dilemma, amit az elnök úr felhozott, hogy hát ha a bérek így alakulnak, és a reál keresetek így alakulnak, akkor lakossági fogyasztás esetleg tudja húzni a GDP-t, és ugye az őszinte válasz az, hogy fordítva kellene lenni, de a tartós gazdasági növekedésnek, ahhoz tartozó termelékenység növekedésnek kellene a bérszintet növelni és a fogyasztást növelni. Na most én idehozok egy-két dolgot, csak megemlítem. A magyar gazdasági szerkezet az modern abban az értelemben, hogy a szolgáltatások teszik ki a jelentős részét, ugyanakkor az európai átlaghoz képest viszonylag nagy a mezőgazdasági részaránya, nem nagyon nagy, de viszonylag nagy az ipar részaránya, nem kiugróan nagy, mondjuk a Csehországhoz képest, de meglehetősen nagy, viszont mind a kettővel gond van, az első az klímaérzékeny, a második meg konjunktúraérzékeny, különösen annak a feldolgozóipari szerkezetét tekintve. Tehát ezért, aki bármilyen előrejelzést készít, azzal mi beszoktuk írni minden évben az agrár teljesítménynél, hogy 100% lesz, annyi, mint tavaly. Hát a klíma nem biztos, hogy így gondolja. És hogyha a gazdasági szerkezet, a mezőgazdasági szerkezet nem tud alkalmazkodni ehhez a megváltozó klímához, akkor mindig 100% alatti indexek lesznek, mert mindig meglepetésszerűen jön az asszály, az, ami szokott jönni. Szóval idehozom. Ugyanakkor elhangzott a Artificial Intelligence-nek az ügye, amelyik talán megdobja a termelékenységet. Hát ebben a magyar pozíció nem túlságosan jó. A magyar pozíció egy fokkal jobb, mint a legalacsonyabb országok, és az emerging marketek fölött van egy kicsit, de bizony a fejlett alatt van. Tehát megint arra utal, ez csak egy mutató, részmutató, és nem a legfontosabb versenyképességi, vagy nem tudom, ilyen egyéb mutató halmaznak az egyik eleme, de arra figyelmeztet minket, hogy a gazdasági szerkezetben gondok vannak, és a jövő gazdasági szerkezetét tekintve a mostani struktúra, a mezőgazdasági, az ipari, a szolgáltatás és annak a belső szerkezete, az a strukturális hátrány sem, mint előny, és ez nagyon más, mint ahogy a térségben el tudtuk magunkat helyezni még a 90-es évek elején. Nos, ezek után akkor mi mit gondolunk? Amit idehoztam, ez a sunshine verzió, ez mikor a nap süt, és nincsenek viharok, és nincsenek esők, és nincsenek záporok. És ahogyha ezt a legjobb változatot, amiben még az a policy változat is benne van, hogy például a deficitet 26-ról 27-re jelentős mértékben visszaképes vágni az akkori kormányzat. Egy nagyon komoly fiskális konszolidáció jön, akkor valóban, hát ha megnézzük azokat a mutatókat, amelyek ugye a legszexisebbek, legérdekesebbek, idén nem lesz GDP növekedés, de 26-ban már lehet akár 2% is. Ez nem 4 és nem 3 és 4, amit a politikusok meg szoktak ígérni évről évre, és évről évre soha nem következik be, és ez az az eset, hogy tulajdonképpen az a feltételezés, egy halom feltételezés van benne, miszerint bekövetkezik egy korrekció a költségvetési egyenlegben. Az egyenleg számításoknál nagyon nagy, miután igen rossz az áttekinthetősége a költségvetési számoknak, itt óriási bizonytalanságban van minden elemző, de hát itt a teremben ülők ezt kiválóan tudják. Úgyhogy az a feltételezés, hogy lesz korrekció, mégpedig nagyon jelentős korrekció, a GDP 1,5%-ára rúgó korrekció. Mikor lesz? Ugye 26 választási év, hát ez 26-nak az első felébe kizárt, tehát akkor fel kell tételezni, hogy a második felébe jön, áthúzódik, nem tud érvényesülni, teljes mértékben rátolódik ennek a keresletszűkítő hatása 27-re, ezért tehát az a bizonyos 3%-os növekedés, amit mindig mindenki vár, ebben az alapverzióban, ami a legoptimistább verzió, nem számít különböző kockázatokkal, ez csak 28-ba tud eljönni. Majd meglátjuk a többi elemzés, mit hoz ki, kíváncsian lássuk egymásnak az adatait. Érdekes egyébként, hogy az elnökök vitájában csak egy fél mondatban hangzott el az, ami a tavalyi előrejelzéseknél mindig a nagy kockázati tényező volt, a világkereskedelmi zavarok és a vámháború. Érdekes módon az európai gazdaság ezt talán jobban meg tudja emészteni, meg a magyar is, mint ahogy reméltük, meg az is kiderült, hogy bár mindenki rosszul jár a vámháborúval, de az Európai Unió és Nagy-Britannia a legkevésbé jár rosszul, reál értelemben tehát akár versenyképességi előnyre is tud szert tenni. Ezt ugye nem lehetett előre tudni még, amikor a különböző kalkulációnkat végeztük. Most azzal számolunk ebben implicite, hogy e vonatkozásban nem lesz romlás, nem jelenik meg olyan maró gúnnyal valamilyen karikatúra az amerikai elnökről, amely 10%-os pluszvám kivetését indokolná. No, és akkor mi lesz a GDP-vel? Az a nagyon nagy kérdés, amit nem lehet tudni, és itt van egy nagyon egyszerű potenciális GDP számítás, de csak egy egyszerű, egy HP filter, tehát lehet mondani mechanikus. Az optimális verzió az, hogy nagyon kicsike még a gap, és ez aztán majd 28-ra tud átváltani pozitív gapra, akkor tud nekilódulni a gazdaság addig, hogy megemészze a 22 utáni korrekciót. Miért ilyen hosszú? Hát tulajdonképpen, ha megnézzük, hogy mi történt az előző hasonló soknál, ott is irdatlan hosszú volt a korrekciója. A magyar gazdaság beesik a gödörbe, és nagyon lassan tud onnan kikapaszkodni. Hát ez volt azért a 2008-2009-es pénzügyi válságnak a következménye. Sokkolóan sokáig tartott, amíg a GDP volumen ki tudott mászni a gödörből. Tehát ha az ember ezt történelem nem ismétli magát, de mégis van valami hasonlóság, akkor nem csoda, hogy ezt kivetítjük ezekre az évekre, és utána majd onnantól kezdve lehet esetleg arra számítani, hogy felgyorsulnak a dolgok. Még ha megengednek annyit, három témát idehozok kifejtés nélkül, az egyik a kockázatok. Van egy társadalmi kockázat, azok a megszorításos költségvetés csökkentési, kiadás csökkentési időszakok, amelyekről az előző panelben az elnökök beszéltek, mint elkerülhetetlen egyébként az összes országot tekintve, szóba hozzák azt, hogy igen, de mi van, ha a társadalom egy része már most is ki van téve a szegénységnek. Én idehoztam azt az adatot, amit láthatunk, ennek a megbízhatóságáról most nem mondok semmit, nagyon nagy viták vannak ismert módon, csak megemlítem azt azon felül, hogy most elhelyezném, hogy a magyar kirekesztettség, szegénység az a francia és a belga között van, tehát mi a baj, hogy azért egészen más, hogy mihez mérjük azt a szegénységet, és az ismereteink szerint a szegénységi küszöböt, ha euróban mérjük, akkor a magyar adatot irdatlan nehéz összevetni, hát nem az osztrákkal, némettel, de még a lengyellel is. Tehát, hogy kéretik ezt azért beszámítani, hogy amikor a magyar relatív szegénységről és egyéb szociális feszültségekről beszélünk, vegyük figyelembe azt, amivel kezdtem, Magyarország nem fejlett ország. Egy mondatot még a kockázatokra, a valutáról. A forint az erősödött, ugye ez a MNB-nek a statisztikás szerint az utóbbi hónapokat nézzük, erősödött, ha nulla az euró, akkor a forint-euró árfolyam erősödött. Hát igen, ha az utolsó néhány hónapot nézzük, ha néhány évet nézzünk, akkor gyengült, nem is keveset, és azt is látjuk, hogy a cseh korona, a lengyel zloty és még a román lei is másképp viselkedett. Na most ebből lehet látni, hogy a magyar forint az egy teher, tulajdonképpen kockázati tényező rajtunk. Miért nem lehet, és akkor mi van a többiekkel? Ugye nem hangzott el, de hát a csehek viszonylag jól megvannak a cseh koronával, és hát most nem is említem a északiakat. Ugye az a lényeg, nagyon röviden, hogyha valaki svéd, és a AAA a besorolása, akkor nem tudja magát össze, hogy megváljon a svéd koronától. Hogyha valaki dán, és AAA a besorolása, akkor el van a nemzeti valutájával. És még a csehek is a 2A- viszonylag könnyen mondják azt, hogy nem sürgős nekik a koronát föladni, mert ráadásul erősödött. Ugye a probléma nem velük van, a probléma a magyar és a román besorolással és helyzettel van. Tehát ezért gondolom, hogy ezeknek az országoknak az a problémájuk, hogy van önálló valutájuk, az összes többinél az egy részben döntés kérdése, hogy tartják, megtartják, ha megtartják, rögzítik, ha nem rögzítik, akkor lebegtetik, de úgy lebegtetik, hogy nem okoz kockázati többséget. Ez azért említem meg, mert időnk eltelvé, milyen az ebédszünet, szóba akarom hozni azokat a kockázati tényezőket, amelyek azért fönnállnak, és ezek alapvetően nem csak a növekedési kockázat van, hanem van egy pénzügyi kockázat, és belső-külső pénzügyi kockázat, annak az egyik tényezője az a valuta, amelyik inflációsabb, mint az összes többi a térségben. Többsége mindenképpen, hát a románokkal ugye ismert módon nagy küzdelemben vagyunk e vonatkozásban, és a legkitettebb kockázati tényezők egyike például a tőkepiaci besorolás. Na most ez a tőkepiaci besorolás, csak egy kommentet szeretnék hozzátenni, hogy a magyar kockázati tényezők között valóban nagyon speciális az eurotranszferek ügye. Máshol jönnek a pénzek, nálunk nem nagyon jönnek. Ha jönnének, akkor nyilván segítenének, elmondta az elnök úr, a gazdasági növekedési ráta megemelésében valamennyit, nem sokat, nem tudjuk. A beruházási ráta növelésében valamennyit. A költségvetés tehermentesíteni bizonyos értelemben, a fizetési mérleget javítaná egy bizonyos fokig, bár hát ha beruházásra megy, akkor van egy importhányad, és akkor a nettó export miatt a növekedési hatása aritmetikailag levezetve nem olyan nagy, de minden esetre nem csak ezért érdekes az euró transferek ügye, hanem azért is, és egy későbbi mondatot szólnék ehhez, mert hogy ez egy jelzés is, azt tekintve, hogy mi a magyar pozíció az Európai Unióban. A tőkeakkumulációnál itt elhangzott, hogy a beruházás az-e, ami gyárba, épületbe, infrastruktúrába megy. Tulajdonképpen azt gondolom, hogy a beruházás részben oda megy, részben azonban valóban mehetne a humántőkébe, és ez nem egy szójáték, hogy az egészségügybe, oktatásba fektetett pénz az beruházás, az valóban beruházás, és különösen időszakban, amikor a technológiai haladásnak nem szükségszerűen tőkeigényes útja van, a magyar gazdaság, cseh is egyébként, nagyon energiaigényes, nagyon tőkeigényes irányba ment el, és ez a tőkeállomány ráadásul kezd öregedni. 3 éve nincs beruházási dinamika, nem is emlékszem még a rendszerváltozás idejére visszagondolva se, hogy 3 egymást követő évben csökkenjen a beruházási index. 2 évig csökken, de 3 évig nem, most pedig 22 nyarától len vagyunk valahol 70%-os szinten. És hát azért idehozom ezt a valuta és árfolyam kockázatot, ezt említettem, árfolyam volatilitás, reálkamat, a szuverén kockázati besorolás mindig izgalom, az adósságfinanszírozás nagyon drága, és hogyha ennyire labilis a valuta, az bizony egy kockázati tényező tőkementésnél is. Időm eltelvén csak 3-4 témát hozok ide azzal, hogy a délutáni szekcióban akkor ezzel lehet foglalkozni. Az egyik az valóban, hogy hol tartunk, mert nem világos, hogy leesett a növekedési ütem, de vissza fog-e pattanni, és akkor rendben van, vagy pedig fellép a hiszterézis, hogy leesett, és úgy marad. Hozzászokott a gazdaság, mindenki berendezkedett erre, a tőkeállomány ilyen, a munkaerőállomány olyan, az intézmények olyanok, amilyenek, itt van, itt kell élnünk, meghúzzuk magunkat. Ugye ez egészen más, akkor hiába lehet várni 3-4%-os növekedésre. Kérdés, kutatási kérdés és vitakérdés. Ugye a másik, ez az uniós pénzekhez való hozzájutás nem csupán azért érdekes, mert jön a pénz, vagy nem jön a pénz, hanem ezt nézik a hitelminősítők is. A 3B mínuszban benne van az, hogy úgyis jönnek a pénzek valamelyest. Hát ha az a következtetés, hogy nem jönnek a pénzek, akkor az egy üzenet sok mindenkinek, nekik is, meg hát a hazai pénz tulajdonosoknak is. Tehát ez egy nagyon fontos ügy azon túl, hogy megnyílnak, vagy nem nyílnak meg ebben az évben, vagy legalább a következő évben azok a források, amelyek még nem múltak el. És hát harmadszor, ez is elhangzott itt, az államháztartásokkal az a baj, hogy túlterheltek funkcióban. A magyar államháztartás rengeteget költ olyasmire, amire máshol nem. Ismert módon az a kategória, amelyben a kultúra, sport, vallás közmédia szerepel, a GDP 3%-át viszi el, hát sehol máshol ennyit nem költenek erre, mutatja egyébként a megtakarítási lehetőségek egyikét, másikát is, mert nyilván a magyar költségvetéshez hozzá kell nyúlni. Az adósságszolgálatot nem is merem megemlíteni a teremben levő külföldi barátaink előtt, mert ugye 5% volt tavaly a GDP-ből, ez Európa rekord, és hogyha az idén jövőre kicsivel kevesebb lesz, akkor sem nagyon tud 4% alá menni. Ez duplája annak, mint mondjuk a cseh vagy a szlovák állam fizet. És az inflációs többlet is beleépült sokok miatt a rendszerben, ez magasan tartja a nominális kamatszintet, ahhoz, ha a Nemzeti Bank magasan tartja maga policy kamat szintjét, abból egy halom versenyhátrány következik, ennek a beárazása nagyon nehéz. Én itt megállok, köszönöm szépen, és azt hiszem, hogy akkor most szünet fog következni, és utána tudjuk folytatni, én elnézést kérek, nem tudok itt lenni az elején, de egy paralel előadás miatt kellett előre kérezkednem, és akkor majd csatlakozom a végén, ahogy tudok. Köszönöm szépen.
Köszönjük szépen Péter prezentációját, és akkor most egy kis ebédszünet jön, amire tisztelte meghívunk minden jelenlevőt, és akkor pontosan 12:30 kezdünk, és a délutáni szekciót pedig Horváth Gábor fogja vezetni. Köszönjük szépen!